Why do we believe we are being paid fairly when we are barely surviving? You wake up. The alarm rings like a factory whistle from the past. You dress not for yourself, but for the image they demand. You clock in. And from that moment on, the clock is no longer yours. It belongs to them. And so does your body, and your breath, and your minutes. They hand you a wage, a number, a reward, they say. But what they don't say is this: that number is not your worth. It's the minimum they can give you, while still keeping the rest for themselves. You're not being paid for your work. You're being paid less than your work, so that someone else can pocket the difference. That's profit. In every dollar you receive, there's another dollar, maybe 2, maybe 10, that vanishes into someone else's bank account. Not because they worked harder, but because they own what you don't, the means. Imagine a man builds a house. He lifts every brick, lays every tile, wires the electricity, paints the walls. And when he finishes, someone else moves in and locks the door behind him. That's employment in capitalism. But we are taught to be grateful, to smile, to compete for promotions, to chase raises like scraps tossed from a banquet table. They say, "You're lucky to have a job." But is it luck, or is it manipulation disguised as opportunity? And still, we thank them. We thank the very people who siphon the life from our hours, who call our exhaustion efficiency, who name our desperation motivation. We thank them because we are taught to confuse payment with justice. But a wage is not justice. A wage is a chain made of numbers. They convince us that we are paid what we deserve, but what we deserve is never even on the table. Because that would mean sharing ownership. That would mean dissolving hierarchies. That would mean power. So the illusion is maintained. You work, you're paid, end of story. But behind the curtain in boardrooms and spreadsheets, your effort is transformed into dividends, into bonuses, into yachts, into second homes in countries you will never visit. And if you stop working, the money stops, but their wealth doesn't. Because their money doesn't come from labor, it comes from your labor. You work to live. They live because you work. It's not a transaction, it's extraction. And they've made you believe it's fair. Maybe you felt it. That silent resentment in your chest, that confusion after a long day. Why does it feel like I've given everything and gained nothing? It's because the system was never meant to reward you. It was built to contain you. You're not being paid, you're being managed, measured, mined. Welcome to wage labor. The great illusion of fairness, designed to keep you producing without ever questioning where your value really goes. They don't steal your money. They steal something far more valuable, your time. It begins with the clock, tick, 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 not a heartbeat, a countdown. Each second surrendered to a system that trades your time for their power. You clock in, and your time, once infinite, once yours, becomes a commodity, a unit, a measure. 8 hours here, 10 hours there, 40 a week, 2,000 a year. And for what? A paycheck that barely carries you from one month to the next. A title that sounds impressive but feels hollow. A promise of promotion that's always just out of reach. This is not just about money. This is about time, the only real wealth you ever had. But in capitalism, time is not sacred. It's inventory, it's fuel, it's cost of labor. And your employer is not buying your skills. They are renting your hours, draining your energy, one shift at a time. You give your best hours to someone else's dream. You come home exhausted, too tired to dream your own. And when the weekend arrives, if it arrives, it feels like a brief gasp of air after drowning all week. But even then, your mind is still chained to Monday. The emails, the deadlines, the pressure, the looming threat of being replaced if you ever stop running. Capitalism doesn't just want your labor. It wants your attention, your energy, your life rhythm. You start setting alarms on weekends. You measure your productivity even in rest. You feel guilty when you're not doing something useful. But useful to who? In a just world, time would be a garden, a space to grow, to explore, to connect. But in this world, your time becomes a machine, efficient, predictable, profitable, for someone else. You're told, hard work pays off. But what they don't say is who it pays off for. They take your youth, they take your moments. They take the first steps of your child, the quiet mornings you'll never get back, the evenings lost to deadlines. And then one day you look in the mirror and realize, they didn't just take your time. They took who you could have become. This is the theft we never talk about. Not the wage gap, not the unpaid overtime, but the theft of life. And they do it with your consent, because the system teaches you that this is normal, that this is just how it is, that you should be grateful for the job, even if it devours your soul one meeting at a time. But what if we stopped calling it work and started calling it what it really is, time extraction? The corporation doesn't care what you create. It only cares how fast, how much, how efficiently. And the faster you go, the more they profit, while your life blurs into a series of deadlines and performance reviews. Your time is priceless, but they've made it cheap. You are not lazy. You are not ungrateful. You are being drained by a system that views your time not as life, but as labor. And somewhere deep inside you know it. That haunting question you ask yourself when the silence finally comes, is this really what I'm supposed to do with my one and only life? They told you to dream big, but they never told you what happens to dreams inside a machine. You remember when you were young, full of ideas, colors, and fire. You wanted to be something, to build, to create. And then, you were funneled into the system, step by step, form by form, desk by desk. And somewhere between your first resume and your first burnout, something inside you went silent. This is not a company. It's not a job. It's a factory of broken dreams. Every day, millions walk into glass buildings with polished floors and artificial smiles. But behind that gloss, something darker hums. A machine fueled by the fragments of human ambition. Your creativity, streamlined into spreadsheets. Your passion, redirected toward quarterly goals. Your identity, rebranded with a corporate email. And if you resist, if you dare to question, slow down, or step outside the assembly line, the system doesn't listen. It replaces you. You are not a person here. You are a function. They give you a chair, a login, and a smiley-faced HR video. But no one asks who you are. Only, can you produce? Can you comply? Can you survive in silence? And you do. Because rent is due. Because insurance is tied to employment. Because you were never given another option. This is how dreams are broken. Not with a crash, but with quiet compromise. One ignored impulse, one sacrificed weekend, one lie to yourself. Just one more year, just one more promotion. But years turn to decades, and one day you wake up and realize the dream didn't die. It was dismantled, piece by piece, and sold for parts. In this factory, ambition is a raw material. Hope is the energy source, and burnout is the smoke that rises from the chimney. You see it in your coworkers' eyes. That dullness, that resignation, that small flicker of rebellion that never quite catches fire. We weren't made to sit still for 40 hours a week, chasing numbers that mean nothing, building systems that destroy the planet, selling products we don't believe in, to people who don't need them. We were made to live, to feel, to create beyond utility. But the factory has no place for that. So it feeds you illusions. Promotions, performance bonuses, titles. It dangles them like carrots, and when you grab them, they vanish, replaced by the next deadline, the next opportunity. This is not employment, it's managed disillusionment. And if you ever feel broken, it's not because you failed, it's because you're human, trying to survive in a system designed for machines. But here's the truth they don't want you to hear. You are not broken. The factory is. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to walk out of the building and remember the dream that once burned inside you before it was monetized. What if your paycheck isn't a reward, but a bribe? We're told we're being compensated, as if money could balance the weight of what we lose. But what if the wage isn't about fairness? What if it's about control? Think about it. You work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You endure stress, monotony, pressure. You miss birthdays. You skip meals. You fake smiles. And in return, you get just enough. Just enough to keep the lights on. Just enough to quiet your doubt. Just enough to keep coming back. It's not generosity. It's calculation. Your wage isn't based on how hard you work. It's based on how little they can pay you without losing you. And what they're really buying is not your talent, not your time, not even your labor. They're buying your silence about the long hours, your silence about the exploitation, your silence when you see a colleague cry in the bathroom, crushed by invisible pressure. You're being paid not to ask why, not to question why your CEO earns in a day what you earn in a year, not to question why your department is understaffed, not to question why the work never ends, but your value is never enough. The wage is a muzzle, a velvet one maybe, but a muzzle all the same. You're praised for being a team player, but what they really mean is, stay quiet. Keep the machine running. Don't look too closely at the gears, because if you did, you might see the truth, that your job isn't your life, but it's slowly becoming it. You wake up thinking about work. You go to sleep worried about work. And in between, you numb the ache with distractions, caffeine, and the promise that one day it'll all pay off. But when? When does the debt of your sacrifice finally balance out? When do you stop living just to not fall behind? They say the wage is freedom. But if it were, why do you feel more like a prisoner than a person? Because the wage is not freedom. It's permission. Permission to survive, not to thrive. Permission to exist, but only on their terms. And you've been taught not to see it. Because the system doesn't need you to be happy. It only needs you to be productive and quiet. So the next time someone says, "At least you're getting paid," ask yourself, what am I really being paid to forget? Because behind every paycheck is a silence. And behind every silence, a system designed not to reward you, but to suppress you. You're not lazy, you're not broken. You're just tired of trading your voice for survival. And maybe it's time to speak. Profit sounds harmless, neutral, even noble. They call it success. They celebrate it in headlines, investor reports, morning briefings. But behind every dollar of profit, there is a subtraction, a sacrifice, a cost. And most of the time, you are the one who paid it. Profit is not magic. It is not created from thin air. It is extracted and pulled from your time, your energy, your life. But it's dressed in suits and graphs, hidden behind jargon like growth and efficiency. So we don't see the violence, because it doesn't bleed. No one screams when their weekend is stolen. No sirens ring when a parent misses their child's first steps because of a late shift. No headlines mourn the creativity choked out by endless meetings and empty quotas. This is not violence with fists. It's violence with structure. It's slow, it's legal, it's praised. And the ones who profit never have to witness the cost. A CEO celebrates record earnings, while the janitor picks up another night shift. Shareholders toast to dividends, while the worker skips meals to stretch their wage. The higher the profit, the deeper the silence below. Because profit depends on one thing, you giving more than you're paid for. More hours, more focus, more submission. And if you resist, you're not a team player, you're replaceable, you're too emotional. But what's emotional about wanting justice? They say profit is the reward for risk. But what risk does a billionaire take? That compares to the risk of not making rent. They say profit is earned. But who did the earning? Who built the product? Who answered the phones? Who kept the lights on? You. But the profit doesn't return to you. It moves upward. Always upward. Because the system is designed that way. The worker makes the product. The company sells the product. The owner keeps the difference. And then they say, you should be grateful. As if your survival is a gift. as if the violence done to your body and spirit is a favor. But profit, in its purest form, is organized inequality, a mechanism to concentrate wealth by dispersing suffering. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't look like oppression, it looks like opportunity. That's the mask. And as long as we believe in it, as long as we chase profit as if it were justice, the violence continues, unseen, unspoken, but always felt. So the next time someone celebrates profit, ask, whose labor made it possible? Whose dreams were sold to make those numbers rise? Because when you peel away the charts, when you strip away the branding, you'll find something raw underneath, a system built on taking and calling it success. They told you that you're part of the company's costs, that your wage is an expense they must manage. But what if that's not the truth? What if you're not the cost, but the product? Think about it. In school, they teach you how to follow. In college, how to compete. In job interviews, how to sell yourself. Not your ideas, not your potential, but yourself as a brand, a package, a unit of productivity. And once you're hired, you're no longer a human being. You're a line on a spreadsheet, a metric, a performance score, an asset when you're useful, a liability when you're tired. You sit at your desk, you do the work, and the work becomes data. The data becomes output. The output becomes profit, not for you, but for them. They don't just sell the products you make, they sell the you that makes them. Your attention, your adaptability, your willingness to endure. Everything that makes you human becomes marketable. Your passion, rebranded as drive, your anxiety, reframed as urgency, your burnout, ignored as normal. And the more efficient you are, the more profitable you become. But not for yourself. You don't own the fruits of your labor. You don't own the ideas you generate. Sometimes you don't even own your own time. You are not an employee. You are intellectual property on legs. This is the final twist of capitalism. You're not selling labor. You are being sold. In meetings, they talk about headcount like inventory. They say human resources as if you're coal or oil. You are not a partner. You're a resource to be used, measured, optimized, and replaced. And the more compliant you are, the more they reward you. Not with ownership, but with titles. With pizza parties. With meaningless perks that vanish the moment you become too expensive. They call it a career, but it's really a subscription to yourself. Every year you pay with your health. Every day you pay with your attention. Every moment you pay with your soul. And what do you get in return? A wage that lets you survive, but never enough to break free. Because if you broke free, you'd see the system for what it is. Not a ladder, not a team, not a meritocracy, but a machine. And in this machine, you're not just a worker, you're the commodity. So the next time they say, we can't afford to give you a raise, remember, they can afford it. They just profit more when you accept less. And the moment you see that, really see it, the illusion begins to crack. You are not too expensive, you are too aware. And that is what they truly fear. They say you're free, free to choose, free to work, free to leave. But is it freedom? When every door leads to another cage, they tell you, you don't have to work here. But what they don't say is that everywhere else looks exactly the same. Different logo, different manager, same chains. You're free to sell your labors, but only if someone wants to buy it. You're free to leave your job on, but rent is still due. You're free to speak on, but only if it doesn't threaten your employer's interests. This is not freedom. This is managed choice. A menu of options designed to keep you inside the system without ever questioning the system itself. They give you flexible hours, as long as you're always available. They give you remote work, but your home becomes the office. They give you unlimited vacation, but you're too afraid to take it, because you know, freedom comes with conditions, and the cost of stepping out of line is silence, obscurity, unemployment. Capitalism wears the mask of liberty, but its core is obedience. They've rebranded the old chains. They're not iron anymore. They're psychological, emotional, economic. You don't need guards when people police themselves. You don't need fences when fear builds walls inside the mind. You're told to follow your passion, but only if it can be monetized. You're told to be your own boss, but still chained to clients, debt, the market. You're told to hustle harder, but the finish line keeps moving. And so you run, not because you're free, but because you're afraid to stop. Because stopping means falling behind. Falling behind means losing status. Losing status means losing worth. And what is a human life in this world, if not productive? You don't belong to yourself. You belong to your performance, to your ability to meet expectations, to your capacity to endure. This is not freedom. This is survival dressed as choice. And maybe you've felt it. That emptiness after a win. That hollowness after a raise. That question that won't leave you alone. If I'm so free, why do I feel so trapped? Because freedom here doesn't mean liberation. It means permission to participate. On their terms. But real freedom begins when we see the cage for what it is. Not a failure, not a glitch, but the design. And once you see the bars, you can start to imagine a world without them. A world where freedom means more than choice between brands, bosses, or burnout. A world where freedom means ownership of your time, your labor, your life. Until then, we are free only in theory, and chained in practice. You wake up, you get dressed, you show up, but something's missing. Not your keys, not your phone. You. Alienation isn't a word we hear often, but you feel it every single day. It's that subtle ache, that distant numbness, that strange sense that you're doing everything right and still drifting further from who you are. In capitalism, alienation is not a bug. It's the system's default setting. You are alienated from your labor. You build things you don't believe in. You follow orders you don't understand. You chase goals you didn't set. And at the end of the day, what you made doesn't feel like it belongs to you, because it doesn't. You are alienated from the product. You pour hours into tasks, spreadsheets, calls, but the result disappears into someone else's profit report. You don't get to touch it, own it, celebrate it. You are alienated from others. Work becomes competition. Colleagues become rivals. You smile through gritted teeth, network with people you don't trust, all while wondering if they're just waiting for your spot to open. Solidarity dies in silence, in fear, in the pressure to outperform. But worst of all, you are alienated from yourself. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" Instead, you ask, "What do they need from me?" You no longer live from within. You perform, adapt, comply. You become a stranger in your own life, a shell, a perfectly productive ghost. And when that emptiness creeps in, on a Sunday night, in the commute, in the mirror, you don't even have the words for it. Because no one told you this was a symptom. No one told you that capitalism does this by design. It disconnects you, so you'll stop questioning, stop feeling, stop dreaming. And instead you'll keep moving, keep producing, keep pretending. Because that's what the system needs. Not humans, but machines with faces, hearts that beat on schedule, souls that don't speak. But somewhere inside, the real you still lives. Buried beneath KPIs, emails, fake smiles, still whispering, "This isn't who I am." Alienation is not your fault. It is a political wound, disguised as personal failure. And healing doesn't begin with a vacation. It begins with recognition. Recognizing that your discomfort isn't weakness, it's awareness. And that awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your life. You are not just a worker, you are a whole person, with desires, ideas, contradictions, with a right to see yourself in what you do and in who you are. And the moment you stop numbing that voice, you begin to reconnect, not just with others, not just with purpose, but with yourself. We love to hate the boss, the one who micromanages, the one who takes credit, the one who doesn't understand, doesn't care, doesn't listen. But what if the boss isn't the problem? What if the boss is just a symptom? Because the truth is, If your boss quit tomorrow, nothing would really change. A new one would take their place, the same meetings, the same pressures, the same system. Because it's not about who is in charge, it's about what they're upholding. Your boss is a function, a role in a script written long before either of you arrived. They enforce quotas not because they're cruel, but because the company demands constant growth. They deny your raise, not because they hate you, but because budgets are designed to favor shareholders. They push you, drain you, silence you, not out of malice, but out of necessity. The system requires it. Your boss may be human. They may even be exhausted too. But the system they serve, it's mechanical, built to prioritize capital over care, productivity over people, profit over purpose. And if your boss refuses, if they choose empathy over output, they're removed. That's how systems work. They self-correct. They defend the structure, not the individual. So blaming the boss is easy. It feels good. It personalizes your pain, but it also obscures the truth. Because the real enemy isn't the person above you. It's the hierarchy itself. A pyramid built to concentrate power at the top while dispersing stress and suffering at the bottom. You fight with your supervisor while the owners remain untouched. You protest your hours while the investors sleep soundly miles away. It's divide and conquer, and it works. Because as long as we hate each other, we never question the system that pits us against one another. We blame bad managers, but what if management itself is the problem? What if we stopped asking for better bosses and started asking for no bosses? What if work didn't need to be ruled but shared? What if leadership meant collaboration, not control? These are the questions the system fears, because they lead not to reform, but to revolution. To imagine a world where power is horizontal, where labor is democratic, where no one's livelihood depends on obedience to a person they didn't choose. That world won't come from firing your manager. It will come from unlearning the entire structure. So the next time you feel the rage, don't just look up, look through. Because the boss isn't the disease. The boss is the fever, the symptom of something far deeper and far more dangerous. And that's what we must heal, not with better managers, but with a better world. Revolution doesn't begin with violence. It doesn't start with fire. It starts with a question. What if none of this is natural? What if the long hours, the endless pressure, the quiet despair, what if they aren't personal failures, but deliberate designs? You've been told, that's just how the world works. But whose world, whose rules, whose profit? Because the truth is, the system was never neutral. It was built, engineered, to serve a few by exhausting the many. And the most powerful tool it ever created was not a machine, but a belief that this is all there is, that survival is enough, that questioning is dangerous, that obedience is virtue. But consciousness, real, raw consciousness, breaks that spell. When you begin to see the machinery behind the curtain, the illusion starts to dissolve. You realize you're not crazy, you're not lazy, you're not alone, you're awake. And that awareness is dangerous. Because once you see the system for what it is, you can no longer play your part without pain. You start asking, why am I paid less than I produce? Why don't I control the work I do every day? Why does the world revolve around profit, not people? These questions are acts of rebellion because they threaten the narrative, the myth of meritocracy, the story that says hard work equals success. But what if success was never about effort? What if it was always about position, about ownership, about power? The moment you see that, really see it, you're no longer just surviving. You're resisting, not with slogans, but with clarity. Not with slogans, but with solidarity. Not with fists, but with vision. A vision of a world where labor is shared, where value isn't hoarded, where the purpose of life isn't to produce, but to live. This is not a dream. It's a direction. And consciousness is the compass. You won't see it in commercials, you won't hear it in boardrooms, because real change doesn't come from the top. It rises from the bottom up, from minds that refuse to sleep. And when enough of us awaken, the system can no longer hold. Because a worker who understands their exploitation is one step from liberation, and many steps together become a movement. So if you feel like something's wrong, you're right. If you feel like you were made for more, you were. And if you've started to see the world with new eyes, welcome. Consciousness is revolution, and it begins with you. Maybe you've felt it, that quiet pain, that strange sense of living someone else's life, of running a race where the finish line keeps moving. You do everything they told you to, you work hard, you play by the rules, and still, something doesn't feel right, because deep down, you know, this system doesn't see you. It sees what you can produce. It measures your worth in output, not in truth, in performance, not in purpose. But you are not a machine. You are not a number. You are not a line on a budget sheet. You are a life, a story, a revolution in waiting. And maybe, just maybe you're starting to remember who you really are beneath the roles, the routines, the restraints. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Guilty Karl Marx. So change begins not in the streets, but in the mind. It begins when you stop blaming yourself for your exhaustion. It begins when you start asking why the system needs you tired, distracted, and afraid. It begins when you realize the system isn't broken. It was built this way, and the moment we stop accepting survival as the goal, we begin to imagine something radical. Freedom. Not the freedom to obey, but the freedom to live. So tell me, have you ever wondered why you feel so empty after giving so much? Have you ever questioned whether your life truly belongs to you? And what would happen if you stopped surviving and started resisting? If this made you think, if it made you feel, then you are not alone. Leave a comment, speak your truth, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and when you're ready, I'll be waiting in the next video. For truth, for clarity, for revolution.